Chief of Police is going to love this one. You'll have a hoot at this. Check this out. These are some statute laws that were repealed through some acts of law, but they're really, really, really interesting. I was looking at the 1700 Act of Settlement, and then through that, I found some acts of law that repealed some things in that. And I love looking at these lists. I mean, I'm not going to read every single thing, but I like looking through them, and if anything interesting or relevant stands out, I like to go read it and look at it, just like scanning through them and looking for anything that might be interesting. Because I mean, you're not going to read everything. I mean, I know if you are a total boffin, you're going to sit there and read every single act of law, but there's probably, I think that there's probably more. If you just want to read legislation, there's probably enough in an entire library. I don't think that many people have read every single law and all the laws. I mean, you've really got to be, there's some things that just aren't relevant. But this to me, for what I'm interested in, listen to this, right? The Statutes of Westminster, the first, sheriffs and receiving the king's debts shall acquit the debtor, penalty tallies of payment, showing of summons. So that means that from that is very, very interesting, because it suggests to anyone who's not retarded that if you owed money to the king in any way, that the payment of it would acquit the debtor. So that means that if subject to being guilty of something that resulted in a fine, if you paid the fine, you're acquitted. Now, what's interesting about that is that coming on to driving and speeding points and penalties and everything to do with that, because we're interested in stop ULEZ, fines and those sort of things, that firstly in Magna Carta, you cannot actually have your cart, or clearly your use of your cart, taken away from you for your job. They're not allowed to. You can be fined and you can be imprisoned, but they can't take your cart away from you or the use of your cart. Obviously, your license to use it, there's no point having a cart if you can't use it, right? So for work. And that really is homaged. It's more or less a homage to Magna Carta when they have in the modern Road Traffic Regulation Act and Highways Act this, if you are, basically, if your boss has got a schedule that you've got to keep, then, it's a defence against the charge of speeding, because, you've got to get around your schedule so you lose your driving licence because you need it for work, for your job. That, why have that? Well, you have that because it's a homage to Magna Carta. Now, the ironic thing with Magna Carta is this. More recently, when I've showed a little bit more interest in Magna Carta and I'm a bit more clarified, so 3 or 4, I think it's 4 clauses of Magna Carta are still in effect. One of them is that we shall not deny or delay right or justice. Another one of them is the main clause, I think 38 and 39, which is that, judgment by the, we can only be judged through a due process of law through the rule of law or by judgment of the peers. So, or by judgment of the peers, which is like in the Ian Bray case. So, the thing is that the ironic thing about Magna Carta is there's something in Magna Carta that says that Magna Carta cannot be annulled. When Magna Carta was written, there's a clause. Magna Carta says that it can't be annulled. There's a lot of people who say that Magna Carta is not legitimate, but it is legitimate because it's in effect and in force. And many of the clauses were put into other acts of law and other legislation such as the Petition of Right, 3 of the Petition of Right, which had that same clause in it, but then that was later repealed as unnecessary because it's in Magna Carta, which is in effect. But the thing is, if Magna Carta is still in effect, 4 clauses, how can you only have some of the clauses in effect if the whole premise of Magna Carta is that it cannot be annulled? Well, if it hasn't been annulled, and if somewhere in none of either the thing with Magna Carta is that one of the clauses is that Magna Carta cannot be annulled. So if 4 of the clauses are in effect, how can it be annulled? It can't. This is a claim that I'd love to take up with the Supreme Court. Yes, so if Magna Carta has got a clause in it that Magna Carta cannot be annulled, but it was meant to have been annulled, then it seems rather ridiculous that, there are 4 clauses in effect, but the whole document itself says that it can't be annulled. Surely there must be some sort of legal argument for the whole thing being still in effect. Like I said, so there's a homage in the modern law to that Magna Carta clause, and the thing is, the whole point in the act itself seems to be the words Magna and Carta, which also kind of means like, illuminated manuscript, but also it's also gestures towards like a cart when you go around on a cart, and it attracts people towards it, particularly if they're having to walk and not many people have horses. So it's going to attract people towards it, Magna Carta, for a lift, unless it's full. But also it's Magna Carta, always like the illuminations, the glowing pages. What's interesting though, I think, is that also the cart attracts people towards it, and there's got to be a judgment, are you going to let them get on it and give them a lift or not? I think there could be some kind of sort of gesture at the jury, in a court. Shall we call a jury or not? Shall we call a jury, or shall we make judgment, without, shall a judge make a judgment without the jury, or shall he call a jury over? Something about the Magna Carta that you see the people, come over to the cart, he attracts people over towards it, there's something in that. People, I've never really thought of that before. It's a bit more complicated thinking, but it's kind of like, it attracts people over towards it. Are they going to rob you? Or are you got to decide, can you trust them? Do you think they're innocent or guilty? Do you think they're going to rob you, thieves in the wood? Or do you think they just want a lift? Or, are you going to collect money off them? Are you going to fine them for a lift or whatever? There is some kind of irony in that whole situation. I don't think that really the Magna Carta should be annulled, any of the clauses. If it says that either you have it or you don't, well, it can't be annulled. Apparently it can't be annulled, And in a way, if that clause in the modern Road Traffic Regulation Act and Highways Act actually ever was upheld, which it never is, in courts, if they actually did, pay attention to it and did validate it. They never validate it, so what's the point in having it? But it exists. So really the Magna Carta clause kind of, sort of, still is alive in a way, even if it's only a shadow of it, and it's supposed to have a lot more brighter effect than it does, but we all get that robbed from us by these chief officers. Now, the thing is, I've got a very, very serious dispute with the police chief officers concerning substitute law in the claim of right, which is basically what the judge's oath is based on, that we shall not give favour, because I think that they're doing people favours in exchange for confessions and giving information for reduced sentences with the whole NIP system, notice of intended prosecution system, to get massive vast amounts of fines out of people and getting them to depend on themselves. And they say, if you pay within a certain day, if you pay within a certain time, it will only be, X and X money, £80, not 120, if you do it within so many days. That's a favour. Now, the thing is, now I've found this through just random kind of looking at things. I'm glad I found this. Look, one of the statutes, sheriffs receiving the king's debt shall acquit the debtor. So that means that the fine itself, not paying the fine, is a crime, basically. So not paying the fine is an offence, but if you pay the fine, you're acquitted. So do you get that? Do you think that's kind of ironic? It basically means if you hand money over, you're not guilty anymore of anything. So let's get the notice of intended prosecution into the mind then. So, the police chief says that, you've been speeding, so, we want some money off you, a fine. Right, well, if I pay the fine, then I'm acquitted. If I pay the fine, then I'm acquitted. So why am I getting 3 penalty points then? Because that's more than just, if you're acquitted, then you wouldn't get any penalty points, would you? If you pay the fine, then you're acquitted of the offence. So how can you still get, have these penalty points, which are it's a conviction, isn't it? It's a conviction, but you paid the fine. So king's debt shall acquit the debtor. Receiving the king's debt shall acquit the debtor. Obviously, this has been repealed. So let's say you go to a court and you've done an offence and then they find you guilty, right, and you have to pay a fine. So you give the money over, and then what? So then you're acquitted. So basically what it means is that, once you give them the money over, then that's it, basically. But I don't this thing about I've got a criminal conviction or not. But if you've been acquitted, so you don't have if you pay the fine money over, you've been acquitted. But this is back when they only really had imprisonment or fines. They didn't have all these ridiculous things like community service. But the thing is, we see. So yeah, well, what they're doing is like you owe the community or the king some service. So you will do community service, and then once you've done the hours, then you're acquitted. You can go. But, but they might not want money from you. They might want you to do community service now, or they might want you to spend some time in prison. But once you've spent that time in prison, then after that you're acquitted, so you can leave. I think that's the fundamental basis of it. So the thing that I don't get, well, you can get sentences where you have to pay a fine and you get an order, but usually I think that the money you have to pay, you see, I don't really want to get into complicated court fees because I don't understand them, but you've got all this like victim surcharge, blah, 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 and then you've got court fees that you've got to pay. Unless you're found not guilty, then you don't have to pay court fees. But then you've got your fines and so forth. But sometimes you get a fine and something else. You get like 2 punishments. So he's giving you like 3 years with 3 penalty points on and a fine. I don't fall for all this modern penalty point system, with all this because the thing is, if you do something and it's not that serious, right, it's minor. And even if you do that again within 3 years, it's minor. It's not a serious thing. So if you do it, 3 times in, over 2 years is quite a long time. But if it was only a minor thing, how can it ever be a serious thing if it was only a minor thing? If you do something serious, then that's serious. But minor things are by nature more frequent and common than serious things. So, if you never do a serious thing, if you only ever do minor things which are more common, this is the thing. although they want to deter people from doing anything at all wrong. But we're human, you know, we are human. That's the whole point. I don't like this whole. It to me, they're wanting to rake money in, and unfortunately, the wrong way to do it is to claim that everyone's a criminal. By making up laws and rules that make people into criminals for commonplace things, it's not right. It's not just, in my opinion. And when we look at statute laws and what the fundamental principles of law are, and, you know, rights and liberties, what it's founded on, we find that there are certain principles which were established for very serious reasons when we had, like, fighting, wars, battles, generals who were, you know, acting as judges, you know, executions, and quite nasty, gruesome, horrible histories. And there were certain nasty things like blackmailing people and these other things that were going on, you know, in these castles and wars and so forth, that we said, look, you know, this is an unjust practice. It's dishonourable. And what we find is that in the modern day, when we're all meant to be, you know, advanced and technological, we've got these nasty, unjust practices in flourishing with these chief officers, you know, raking fines in, you know, like jingle, jingle, jangle, jangle, like Jimmy Savile with the jewellery, you know. You know, this is what I think these police chief officers, you know, like Sir Peter Fahey and people like that, with all their Bredbury jokes and so forth, and really illegal road signage, and you know, raking the, you know, with a fishing net, catching all this money. But it turns out that it's actually an unjust practice, you know, getting people to, oh, look, I'm getting confessions, you know, confessions, oh, confess, all these little nips, pinchers. It turns out it's illegal. And you know, this is the thing with these psychotic police chiefs, like, you know, Peter Fahey and, you know, Mark Rowley. I think you've got to be a sandwich short of a picnic to do that.